Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Welcome today to the show on July 4th. Happy 4th of July to anybody that is watching this show. Hopefully by the time you guys are watching this, you're enjoying yourselves, having a burger, spending time with friends, having an adult beverage if you're over 21 years old, wherever the case may be, pairing it up with this show. I can't think of a better way to spend 4th of July. But on today's episode, we're going to talk a lot about the NFC and some of the things going on in them and just around the NFL in general. Starting off with another update on Brandon Aiyuk and his contract situation. What did the latest reports say on where the negotiations stand now this week? Then, if you guys didn't catch the premiere of Hard Knocks, the offseason version, talking about the New York Giants, we're going to discuss the first episode and some pretty wild statements that were made. I'm going to go pretty in-depth and probably be pretty emotional about it, so we're going to go talk about that, and also talking about some of the teams that I believe can go from worst in their divisions last year to potentially first in 2024. Who has the best chance of doing that? I will discuss that later in the show, but before I get started, if you guys have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, I'm able to see your question or comment, and that way I'll acknowledge it, read it on air, and get your guys' thoughts on anything. It's a massive help for the show and also the network, so please, if you would, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, whenever you have a question or a comment that you want to make. But in saying that, to the first topic, another chapter in this Brandon Aiyuk saga. Last Monday, Brandon Aiyuk requested to have a sit-down meeting with 49ers personnel to talk more in depth about getting an extension done. I talked about it on this show, and I figured it was going to be sort of this last meeting, a final face-to-face showdown between Aiyuk, his representatives, and the 49ers on how can we move forward, what can we do to progress this deal into something that benefits both of them by staying on the 49ers, or maybe start thinking about further steps away from splitting from each other. So that happened last Monday, and these negotiations, after they were had, a lot was being said that the negotiations were great. A lot of reports said it was a lot more positive and that both parties were in the same boat, same idea that they wanted to have Brandon Aiyuk on the team, that being the 49ers. They wanted to move forward with the idea that Brandon Aiyuk will play for them in 2024. The meeting went great, according to some reports from Tom Pelissero. So that was one thing. That was last week. But if you go back to the clips from the pivot, if you guys haven't watched that, I highly recommend it to watch that episode on Brandon Aiyuk. But Aiyuk did emphasize that he did want to stay on the 49ers, which is the overarching theme of these negotiations. Aiyuk would ideally want to stay there, and it's not like he's pushing for a trade right now. There's been no inclination of that up until this point, so he did say he wanted to be on the 49ers. That's why I think, nothing's being made too drastic right now, but he was open to the Washington Commanders and also the Pittsburgh Steelers. With that in mind, after the meetings, the reports that followed were pretty positive, and moving on from those meetings, or from that meeting and from those reports, now we get a new, fresh report coming from the negotiations that happened last week, and this time it was from NFL Network's Mike Garafolo, and he said on the topic that, he said, for Aiyuk and the 49ers, they had conversations recently, obviously with the meeting. They are no closer to a deal, from my understanding, but they are also no closer to a trade request. That's never been something that he has explored in this case. And I think the quote is what it is in itself. It's a statement from Mike Garafolo saying something but also not saying too much at the same time, except for that last part that I found really interesting when he says that's never been something that he has explored in this case. I think he should have added yet at the end of that, because it goes back to the point I made about his first choice. Brandon Aiyuk's first choice is to stay on the 49ers, and there still is a good amount of time in this offseason before we even start training camp, and then all that period that you have with training camp as well. he's not rushing to get out the door right now. I agree with that feeling that Brandon Aiyuk is pretty content right now. There's no real movement. It's not like Brandon Aiyuk walked away angry or upset with that. That's not what the report said, but I think he's content right now because he wants to be on the 49ers. But there is always that chance, at least in my mind, that this could get to a point where it comes to a point where Aiyuk can only, I guess, listen to the same rebuttal, same statement coming from the 49ers until he realizes that I'm going to have to ask for a trade or else this is just going to keep repeating itself. They're not going to move, and quite frankly, he's trying to play. He's trying to earn himself a massive deal, and by taking a year off or holding out into the season, it does hurt his chances a little bit if it's an extended holdout. We saw it last year a little bit with Chris Jones. He sat out the first game, and it definitely helped that they lost at home to the Detroit Lions. They gave him that massive deal right after that, but I'm not saying it's going to get to that point right now just based on what we're seeing, but again, I think he should have added yet to the end of that statement because I believe it can get to that, but there's no real hurry yet from Aiyuk, it seems, to get to that point. And also I saw something also on this topic, on these reports, that the idea that nobody wants to offer Brandon Aiyuk $29-30 million that he allegedly is asking for, because if some other team was willing to give him that contract, he would have already, we've already would have seen some trade talk, some more in-depth look into some teams that are willing to trade for him. I don't agree with that so much. I think more so it's the 49ers' high asking price that is really keeping teams away from coming up to the 49ers and offering anything, because they know that, one, it's going to be a lot. They're going to be asking for a lot, maybe a couple first-round picks. I wouldn't do that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did ask for a couple, or just a couple picks in general, high picks overall. And you also have the idea that with Brandon Aiyuk mentioning the Steelers and the Commanders as one, or as two of his preferred options, not to say that he can't be open to anywhere else, but when teams see that in combination with the high asking price from the 49ers, it gives them a little bit more doubt whether or not to approach the 49ers, because you feel that Brandon Aiyuk would really want to play, obviously, with Jaden Daniels. I think that's the favorite to land him if he doesn't return to the 49ers. So teams, knowing that, don't want to almost waste their time in that negotiation if they approach. They already have a high asking price, and if you work yourself somehow through that, Aiyuk really isn't 100% in on the situation, depending on what team it is. I'm not saying he won't be open, but according to what he said, mentioning only two teams, it seems like that could be an option where teams find themselves being a little bit more hesitant because of what Brandon Aiyuk said, and just more on the idea that there hasn't been any more movement towards an extension. There's been no movement towards a trade. To go off of that last point, my initial thoughts went to the fact that he only named two teams on the point of being traded. So with there only being two teams, not too much movement around those two teams, because they already know they're the preferred destination, so they don't have to rush to the door to beat other teams. To go along with what I just said, other teams like the Jaguars or the Bills or the Patriots, teams that need wide receivers, might not be so inclined to approach them, and the Commanders and the Steelers might not be so hurried to go and approach the 49ers, because they know Aiyuk wants to be there, and they could be a potential trading partner later on when the 49ers are starting to get annoyed. There's no compromise being made, and Aiyuk is really adamant, potentially, I'm not saying that I believe he will be, but that could be an option later on, that Aiyuk is holding out, and he will continue to hold out until they trade him. So you don't want it to get to that point. That's a very ugly situation, and both parties end up losing. But in that point, with the Commanders and the Steelers being the preferred destination, they're not so rushed to go up to the 49ers and say, oh, we're willing to give you this right now. That's not how it works right now. They're going to have more leverage the longer they wait, and if this situation does get ugly, it only benefits the Commanders and the Steelers later on. But right now, another stalemate. It's going to stall for a while now. I didn't expect it to come out this way. I thought once the positive meetings were coming from last Monday's meeting. I felt that we were going to see just more reports saying that, oh, they're close, it could happen this week. But really nothing happened, just more of the same. And I don't know how Aiyuk's feeling right now. I'm sure he adamantly feels he should get that money, and it's hard to argue against the fact that he should, just based on the fact that he is most likely the 49ers' most pure elite wide receiver, just on wide receiver skills. Not so much like Debo, because Debo is everywhere, but he brings that to the 49ers offense, and he's also coming off a great year as well. It's hard to argue against them from that point of view, but the 49ers also have to think long term. They're going to have to pay Brock Purdy. They just gave an extension to Debo Samuel, an extension to Christian McCaffrey. They re-signed Juwan Jennings. They're walking on eggshells right now. Everything is very calculated. Everything is very sensitive right now on how they move forward with this, but I'm probably going to update it whenever something else comes out. So for right now, that's the latest update on Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers. And in saying that, we're going to take a break. That'll be all for that segment. And when we return after our first commercial break, we're going to come back and talk about the premiere of Hard Knocks, the offseason version. The Giants are the team focused on for this entire documentary. And in the first episode, there was a lot of interesting quotes made, in particular about Daniel Jones and how the Giants are approaching him in 2024. Very controversial. I'm going to talk a lot about it. So when we return, we're going to touch on that topic. So don't go anywhere.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign. A sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign. A sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign. A sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here now to start the second segment of the show. The premiere of Hard Knocks, the offseason version, debuted back on Tuesday, July the 2nd, and it's going to continue to be debuted on TV each Tuesday that we go on, I think until July 30th. So this entire month is just going to be filled with following the Giants offseason this year, because they are celebrating their 100th season this year, so it made sense to follow them, how they maneuvered through the offseason, being filmed from January to July, and it did work out in a good way for us fans, for an entertainment point of view, that the Giants were involved in a lot of controversial things, a lot of puzzling things, and things that just don't make sense and that require explanations, and you definitely got them in this first episode, because one of the main points that was touched on in the show was that the Daniel Jones situation, coming off an injury, a year removed from paying him a massive contract, and also Saquon Barkley briefly, that I'm going to talk about in this segment in relation to Daniel Jones as well. How both of them are connected and how they have been connected really since last year. It was a tough situation for both of them because the Giants found themselves in a place where they franchise tagged Saquon last year and they gave the extension to Daniel Jones. They gave him a massive contract. I think a $40 million salary is what he's earning right now, and that questionable at the time, but you can understand it because everybody's doing it, and it just goes back to the point I made a few episodes ago that these teams, they're just paying these quarterbacks now because of the fear of not having a quarterback. But more on that in just a few seconds when I continue on with these points. But they paid him, so now this offseason they were in a tight spot to also try and fit Saquon Barkley on their salary cap because he was obviously going to request a lot, still on his rookie deal, off of a franchise tag. There's no way he would have accepted another franchise tag. So he hit the open market, and don't you know it, he signed with the Philadelphia Eagles. A big slap in the face to New York, but again, it is a business. You keep it professional. If you're Saquon, especially if you're a running back, because of the market, very dangerous waters in terms of knowing when you're going to get another contract like the Eagles offered Saquon. So I don't blame him, but all of New York probably does. They don't feel great about it. Former running back Tiki Barber felt a certain way about it. But that's just the matter of fact. That's just how it all plays out. I think Saquon did the right thing for him, especially at $12 million per year. It was a no-brainer, especially to join, putting all bias aside, putting all loyalty away from the New York Giants. You're joining one of the best teams in the NFC that could arguably give you the best chance to win by adding yourself to that picture. They're a juggernaut now, the Philadelphia Eagles, but how did they get there? How did they get to this point? Well, one of the main pieces of statements that General Manager Joe Schoen made on the first episode was how he was approaching this idea of paying Saquon and how it related to Daniel Jones, really. I want to keep it on Daniel Jones just in this segment. If you look at it, when he mentioned it, I have the quote pulled up here that I wanted to show you guys. When he said it, the first part of it was that you're paying the guy $40 million. That's not to hand the ball off to a $12 million back. And he continued on with that same sentiment to say, this is the year for Daniel. The plan all along was to give him a couple of years. Is he our guy for the next 10 years, or do we need to pivot and find somebody else? So there's a lot of things to unpack there. One, it makes sense. Truly, just looking at the facts, talking financially about the money and how you want to build this team going forward, it does make sense to look at these two situations because of the fact you already paid Daniel. You already made that decision. It's not logical. It's not smart to pay the running back that much money if you want to continue to build this team, get better, add free agents, or make trades like they did this offseason. There's no way they would have added some of the players that they did if they would have been paying Saquon that amount of money. So it makes sense by that standpoint. But they didn't pay the right guy. They didn't make the right decision because it goes back to that point that I wanted to bring back now about overvaluing and misevaluating the quarterback position. Because the Giants have been struggling with the quarterback position, because they've been in this just constant cycle of trying to find the guy after Eli Manning, you saw a very bright flash. You saw a very bright moment from Daniel Jones in the playoffs and in that season where you guys got to the playoffs, won on the road, and whether or not you lost to the Eagles by 20, by 10 or 5, you were pretty satisfied with that. But I get it is hard to, pull yourself away from that, and seeing that, how could you not want this guy to continue on your team? But again, if you're comparing Daniel Jones and what he brings to Saquon and what he brings, you're talking about one of the most generational, talented players that the Giants have had on their team in probably since the year 2000, arguably. And especially in such a rough point, what Saquon has done through all those tough times of cycling through quarterbacks, cycling through wide receivers, trying to fix that offensive line, it's a miracle that he has put up the numbers that he has, but it just goes back to his talent and the way that they've surrounded him. No, it's no real surprise that he's gotten injured with the workload that the Giants have put on him. And comparing that guy that has done so much for the Giants to Daniel Jones, just because he's a quarterback, I think the Giants value that more. And it makes sense because he is a quarterback. But there's no way anybody can convince me or just tell me that what Saquon brings and what he's asking for in a contract, there's no way you would still go with Daniel Jones. Even if he's a quarterback, everyone's just so afraid of not having the quarterback, of trying to find their next quarterback, and arguably trying not to pay him that much money. It looks cheap now with Daniel Jones that he's getting paid $40 million, but again, you look at it now, hindsight, most people would want to have Saquon on their team and take the risk of trying to find another quarterback. They probably would have traded up in the draft or would have been more aggressive in the draft, and maybe not drafting Malik Neighbors, but you'd probably go out and be more aggressive to get a Drake May, maybe get J.J. McCarthy at 6. They easily could have done that because he was selected at the 10th pick. So you're handcuffed now, Daniel Jones. You're handcuffed, and that's more so on the Giants. I don't want to make it seem like, Daniel didn't pay himself that much money, but because the Giants decided to do that, they had to part ways with Saquon, and now, unfairly, fairly, you guys can make your distinction on that, but when getting paid that amount of money at a quarterback position, the expectations now start to roll in, whether you're ready or not. And clearly, I don't think Daniel Jones was ready right away for all these expectations, especially in New York, in that market that is absolutely brutal. If you're not performing well enough, they're going to definitely let you hear about it. So he wasn't ready for it, but it was going to come because you got paid that amount of money, and he just hasn't lived up to the expectations, especially getting picked at 6th overall a few years back now. The Giants have made that mistake of overpaying him and now putting all these expectations on him already, where they clearly didn't have a basis to really go off of that and think confidently that he's going to be turn the corner. He's going to be their franchise quarterback for the next year. Joe Schoen even mentioned it in his quote. He said this is the last year for him. This is a big year for him. Is he going to be the guy for the next 10 years, or do they have to find somebody else? They obviously still have questions about it, and not to say that they fully regret giving him that contract, but you can see in that statement that he is not 100% sure that Daniel Jones can be the guy, and that they're almost stuck in a way in this position. And injury problems have been a big issue with that. That's more so on Daniel not staying healthy enough to play in some of these games. The turnovers has been a big problem. Questioning even more why they gave him that deal based on what he's shown you, based on his ability to stay hurt. Arguably a lot like Tua, and you see how much doubt the Miami Dolphins have in giving him that massive contract. But the Giants, I guess serving as an example to the Dolphins, had no real hesitancy to do that, and now it has backfired on them, which you could say is why the Dolphins aren't going right ahead and giving Tua $40 million per year. But on that note, it also does come along with the protection. How good is the Giants' offensive line? And another statement that Joe Schoen made in the first episode was, just very exemplified of what I'm trying to bring up with the offensive line. He said he didn't have much of a chance this year. That's legit. The core guys that were going to play together played 60 snaps together. Miami, we got 3 effing practice squad guys playing for us. You could have Patrick Mahomes. He can't effing win behind that. Clearly frustrated, but he makes a good point, Joe Schoen, at the end of the day with the offensive line. It hasn't been great at all, and that goes hand in hand with Daniel Jones arguably getting injured, but the turnovers is another thing. And going off of the point that I made before with the Giants handing Daniel Jones this contract, which I don't think is a good decision or was a good decision. Now the fact that you add on them not being able to build up this offensive line and develop it over and over and over again that they've tried, that again is on them, unfortunately, for not really acknowledging the fact that this offensive line is not ready at all. But regardless of that, you're still going to pay this quarterback $40 million and let Saquon walk out the door because, quite frankly, because he is the quarterback. He's the quarterback. You always need a quarterback to give yourself a chance. But I think teams really need to start reevaluating this approach that just having an average quarterback who you still have a lot of doubts about is not better than a running back with a deteriorating running back market. It might seem expensive, but it isn't worth it. You just have to look more so at the value of the player, regardless of position. I know it's hard because of how everybody talks about the quarterback, but looking at what the player brings to this team is really the biggest point I wanted to make in all of this. And it's crazy. I can't imagine, I'm not a Giants fan at all. And it sounds like I am the way I'm talking about them, but it's just crazy how they've played into that and how they've just gone in on this idea that paying Daniel Jones this much and then thinking that letting Saquon walk away was somehow going to be all right for them, because now they're in a tough situation. Joe Shane mentioning this is the year for Daniel. This is probably the year for Brian Daboll as well. He's on the hot seat, arguably for Joe Shane as well as the general manager, for a lot of guys on that team. So it's a lot going into 2024, and I don't think it's honestly fair to make this year Daniel Jones' last year or have it be a make or break year for him, because they're not ready. They haven't made this team ready. They haven't made the players around him in a ready situation for him to be the most successful. I don't expect it to be any different than it was last year. And if the blame is going to fall on Daniel Jones, which it probably will, he's going to walk away. They're going to trade him or just put all the blame on him, where I think, again, more teams, more people should look at the Giants and how this was really mismanaged from the beginning, making a wrong decision and now having to live with the consequences of it. So that's my outlook, I guess, on the Giants, on where they are right now and going forward into 2024. It's not looking good. I love Malik Neighbors. I thought that was a good decision, but they're just not ready, in my opinion, in a division where they could have had a good chance to compete for because of the Cowboys being the Cowboys and being 50-50, but I don't even think they're that much better at all than the Cowboys. So that's an opportunity missed. The Commanders are taking advantage of it, and the Giants are just going to have to really reevaluate next offseason on what they're going to do moving forward. But that'll be enough on the Giants. I'm going to talk about them more tomorrow and some other interesting quotes that came from the first episode, more so around Saquon and that decision and how they came to that decision. But another segment that's coming up after this break, we're going to talk about my rankings, or the teams that are most likely to go from worst in their division last year to potentially competing for that number one spot and taking the division crown in 2024. I went through all 8 divisions and we're going to rank them all 1 to 8. So that is coming up right after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to the show. We're going to talk on a hypothetical situation. Looking at the teams, looking at all the teams throughout the 8 divisions in the NFL, some teams finished last, and they didn't finish last with a bad record. Some teams definitely did, but I thought it would be interesting to bring up today which teams, after they've all rebuilt, they've all improved, some of them significantly, some of them not too much, on which teams have the best opportunity to make a massive jump from finishing last in their division to competing and having a good chance of taking the number one spot in each of their divisions. So we're going to start off from 8 and work our way up to number 1. Starting at number 8, who has the least chance to go from worst to first? I have the Carolina Panthers. Not really too much of a chance for the Panthers. Not too much to say that I haven't said already. It's only the beginning of this rebuild. They're only just taking their first initial step. They got a new head coach again, which means new ideas, new establishing of a culture, trying to get Bryce Young playing like a number 1 overall pick. they're doing better than they did last offseason, giving themselves better of a chance. But still, when you look at the Atlanta Falcons, when you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as the main two contenders in my eyes for the NFC South title, the Carolina Panthers just don't really stack up to them. And in a perfect world, they could take third place. But that's not what we're talking about. They could take third place, and that would be a very successful season to them, because that would probably mean that they'd finish around 500 or close to that. So that's what they're competing for, not from worst to first, unfortunately for them. But moving on to the next team I have in the Arizona Cardinals, not so much on them as it was on the Panthers, but they're in a tougher division. They're not taking it from the 49ers. Not really much of a chance there, at least this year. And they're just building off last year. You have a healthy Kyler Murray coming in, learning fully the new offense that they're trying to implement. The additions that are coming in, I like them, most recently with Marvin Harrison, and just overall with Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in. I love that. The development of their offensive line, James Conner still there, Trey McBride, their tight end. He broke out last year. And I also am a fan of head coach Jonathan Gannon. I think he brings the right attitude to that team, the right personality. So, again, they're just building on it. And, again, it would be great for them to finish third ahead of the Seattle Seahawks. But for right now, I see it again as a two-horse race between the Rams and the 49ers. But moving on to the next team at number 6, I have the Los Angeles Chargers. Here in my rankings. It was a tough one because with the team at number 5, it was a close decision here, but it more so came down to the competition in this division. I don't expect them to take it away from the Chiefs, so I think they have less of a chance to do that than the team at number 5. And again, they're just getting things going with this new identity with Jim Harbaugh coming over. I think it's going to be successful in this first year in 2024, but it's not all quite there yet. We'd be really optimistic to think, 1, that they're going to compete at all for this division, and 2, it's almost ludicrous to think they're going to take first place away from the Chiefs. But I like the way that they're building it. I like their new attitude, their new identity that is being built, and also the salary cap issues that they had with Keenan Allen's contract, with Mike Williams, with Khalil Mack, and Joey Bosa, working itself through that to hopefully be in a better spot next year where you can bring in even more players, better players. Then in 2025, I think we're going to see a better chance for them to really get their name in there, at least in the conversation. But right now, I think it's still all about the Chiefs. Then we go on to number 5, and I had the New England Patriots. A little bit of a surprise with how bad they were, but I think when you look at the Chargers and when you look at the Patriots at number 5 just ahead of them, in the AFC East, which is what I really based this ranking with these two teams on, the favorite probably is tough. It's tough in this division. That's why I had the Patriots at number 5. They're clearly the favorite to be last, but at the same time, you don't really know what you're going to get out of Buffalo. You wouldn't be surprised if they competed with the Jets and the Dolphins, and you wouldn't be surprised at all either if they had a rough start or just a rough season overall. And you move on to the Dolphins, and they look high-powered, they look fast, they look like they're building off of last year. But in the same breath, is Tua going to be their quarterback? Is he going to stay there long-term? That's a big decision that they're gonna have to make. And then you look at the Jets with all their health concerns and Aaron Rodgers, everybody talking about all these distractions. Are they going to be fully focused on winning that division first off before they get to the playoffs and all of that? So all 3 of those teams are better than the Patriots. They are still favored to be last, but all the indecisive around who's going to be number 1 and what they're going to look like is the reason why I have the Patriots just ahead of the Chargers, because there's no question the Chiefs are probably going to be first in that division. No chance that anybody, maybe the Raiders could give them a run for their money, but the Broncos and the Chargers I don't think really have a shot. So with that being said, I have the Patriots just ahead of them at 5. And at number 4, now moving on to the top 4, in the AFC South, I have the Tennessee Titans. They finished last year, but they arguably had the most turnaround, the most significant, what's the word I'm looking for? The most experienced turnaround, if that makes sense. You brought in established guys more so than all the other teams that I have ahead of them. But again, at the same time, they have a lot of great additions. L'Jarius Sneed, you sign Calvin Ridley, you sign Tyler Boyd, you already have DeAndre Hopkins, you bring in Tony Pollard, which is a solid running back, and you're going to be a lot more offensive, which is great for all the weapons that you have. I love Brian Callahan and him bringing over his ideas from the Cincinnati Bengals, but the quarterback position, I'm not saying I expect Will Levis to be bad by any means, but it still remains a question, and if the quarterback is a question that you have, it means that you're not really there in contention just yet. I think Will Levis could be good, but learning a new system, I think we're definitely going to see some bumps, some bruises, some bad moments from him, still learning in really his second year still, so he's still super young, but that's really why I couldn't have the Tennessee Titans in the top 3 because of those reasons and also how just much better Houston got. They're definitely the favorites to win that division, and it's hard competing with them defensively as well, with how much firepower that they have. The Titans defense got better, but I think adding some more pass rush is another reason why I'm a little 50-50 on them. But overall, I have them at 4, and I don't think that's a bad place to rank the Tennessee Titans just off of one off season. They did phenomenal, so I have them at 4. And then we get into my top 3. And starting off with number 3, obviously, I have the Chicago Bears as the team with the third best chance, in my opinion, to finish first in their division. You look at the Detroit, and that makes it tough. But that's only one team that you could really say is above the rest, just based off of last year, and they got a little bit better this year. But you look at their results that they had last year. They beat the Lions last year. I think they got swept by the Packers, but overall, you look at those two rosters based on talent, it's a lot closer than a lot of people think. You also look at the Minnesota Vikings, very talented. I talked highly of them yesterday, but a rookie quarterback coming in, talented at wide receiver with Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, but TJ Hawkinson is hurt. I don't expect him to start the year. So the Bears could take advantage of that a little bit, and they brought in guys like Keenan Allen. They already had DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift. The offensive line is still one of the most underrated ones in the NFL. This division is going to be extremely close with the 3 teams, Chicago, Minnesota, and Green Bay. I wouldn't be surprised really at all with how highly I think of Caleb Williams also, that the Bears are surprising a lot of people and are keeping it close with the second place team. Maybe they are the second place team, and they're within range at least of the Detroit Lions. If I had to put money on it, the Lions would probably be my pick, but it's close. It's close there with the Bears. They did a good job this offseason to give themselves a good chance and really compete for this division. But they're number 3. They're not number 2 because I have the Washington Commanders on there, and I just finished talking about the Titans adding the most experienced players to their team. Well, Washington just added the most in general. I'm pretty sure that they added the most players in this offseason, and players that really could make an impact on offensive line, on the defensive line as well. You drafted your quarterback. You brought in Austin Eckler. So they're doing things the right way, and I love how they're improving. And also, I think they will get Brandon Aiyuk at some point. So we're holding off on the projections right there, but to have them second. And I think if they could get Aiyuk, they could be the team most likely to go from last to first to have the highest chances of it. But the biggest thing with the Commanders and why I believe they have the second best chance to go from worst to first is because of the doubts that I have with Dallas. I think those two teams are pretty close. Nobody wants to say it just because Dallas is Dallas and they have great players, but I think Washington is pretty close to what Dallas is this season. I don't know if Dak's going to be there. Dak's going to be there. It seems pretty safe that he will play out this year, but CeeDee's holding out. Micah's going to be there, but they made a lot of changes outside of CeeDee. If he does play, Brandon Cooks is just another year older, and the options outside of him aren't too great compared to Washington adding some more talent as well. Jaden Daniels, I think, is really going to change the whole franchise and be the face of this franchise going forward. There's a lot of things circling around Dallas that I'm just not comfortable with them fully focusing on what they have to do on the field. So that's the main thing. And even a little bit with Philly, they're probably the favorites to win this division, but it feels like they always play, the Commanders always play Philly pretty well. Whether it's home or away, it always seems like they play them very well, and they've had quarterback struggles the last couple of years. Now with Jaden Daniels, it could be still a little bit close there. I know the Eagles are tremendously better with Saquon, but at the same time, I don't know. I've seen it be close before, so I just can't completely rule out the Commanders, so that's why I have them with the second best chances to take the crown in 2024. But the best team that has the best chance to do it is the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow's coming back, and that is almost all I have to say with this team, because he makes that much of a difference, honestly. Well, you see the record that they have with him, what they do with him, what they produce with him on the field. It's night and day when he's not there. They missed the playoffs completely last year, and in a division where you have the Steelers, the Ravens, and the Browns, all very tough defenses, very tough just environments to play in, very hard games to play in and to win, especially 2 times in the regular season. But Joe Burrow definitely gives you the best chance of doing that, regardless of who they lost and who they're bringing in to replace those pieces. Having just Joe Burrow out there with that connection to Jamar Chase, and assuming T. Higgins is going to play now because he was tagged and he signed the tender, I think that still gives you a great chance to go to first because of the Steelers and what their quarterback situation is going to be, the Browns, and whether or not we're going to see Deshaun Watson really step into that role. And even a little bit with the Ravens, they showed some weaknesses last year, some flashes of vulnerability where you could attack them. So I think the Bengals, it's not too crazy to say, compared to everybody else, the Washington Commanders are honestly close, but in a division where it's a lot closer and there's not really a clear favorite in my eyes, I think the Bengals could surprise a lot of people. Bringing Joe Burrow back, if he plays like I expect him to play, they're going to be in the thick of things. I truly believe that. But that is my list. Let me know what you guys think about it. Leave your guys' reactions in the comments section of this video. With that being said, we're going to move on to the next break on the show, and we have 2 more topics left to talk about. Just coming off of talking about the Bengals, we're going to look more at the Baltimore Ravens and their wide receiver Rashad Bateman. What are the expectations for him going into 24 after getting a contract extension? What can we expect from him? And some offensive line questions that the Green Bay Packers have to figure out. Could that deteriorate a massive second season from Jordan Love if the offensive line is struggling? We're going to get to answering those questions after this break, so we'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Moving right along with the show, and now looking at the Baltimore Ravens after we just finished talking about the Cincinnati Bengals in my last segment. We're going to look at the Ravens and their wide receiver position because they, I think, got better. I believe that they got better over the years, and just in development of this last season with Zay Flowers coming into his own, especially in the playoffs, I think he really matured. Other than that silly, I think it was unnecessary roughness or just unsportsmanlike conduct penalty that cost them a little bit. I think he really matured, and I liked a lot what I saw from him. But we're going to talk about another wide receiver, Rashad Bateman, who has been on the Ravens roster since they drafted him in the first round back in 2021. And if you look at the career that he's had, the numbers don't jump out at you too much. 93 receptions, 1,167 yards, 4 touchdowns in 3 years with the Baltimore Ravens. I think the aspirations for Rashad Bateman were obviously a lot greater than this if you're going to draft him in the first round. But even with a disappointing start, Baltimore still felt confident in him, and they agreed to a 2-year, $12.8 million extension this offseason in April. No fifth-year option because Rashad Bateman, of his injury designation, wasn't available in his contract. So with that being the case, he was entering into the final year of his rookie contract, and Baltimore decided to extend him, and they didn't take too long. It seems like they feel pretty confident with him and their evaluation of him and what his role could be. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later, but you look at that extension, and also with no other additions to this room up until this point, other than a rookie wide receiver that they drafted, Devontae Walker. It really just going to come down to Zay Flowers again and Rashad Bateman in combination with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, and also no Odell Beckham Jr. this season. Not to say that he was a massive contributor like Zay Flowers was, but he was another option, and now you take that away. And I always get confused. I think it's Nelson Aguilar that is on this team. I always confuse him with Jalen Reagor for some reason, but Nelson Aguilar also is another option that they have. So it's really going to come down to Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, in my opinion, to deliver something, contribute something from the wide receiver position in 2024 to this offense. And Mark Andrews spoke specifically about Rashad Bateman and how he has seen him approach 2024 in a big year. I think a lot of people would agree. Mark Andrews said, his route running, catching the ball, being where he's supposed to be, he has it down to a science. I know he's worked really hard, but he looks about as put together as he's ever been. So it's going to be a big year for Rashad Bateman. I'm calling it right now. And in his 3 years, Rashad Bateman, again, hasn't been great. He struggled with injuries, nagging injuries like a hamstring, some ankle injuries, and also season-ending foot injuries in 2022. And also when he has been out there, the lack of chemistry with Lamar Jackson does definitely play in part to what we're seeing out there. He does have some nice catches here or there. He does contribute somewhat, but it would be greater, in my estimation, if he were out there, got more reps with Lamar Jackson, and was, just available more. But unfortunately, he has been dealing with those injuries. So in 2024, off of the words that Mark Andrews said and how he has looked so far, it looks like he is up for the challenge in his statement also that he made after Mark Andrews. And after that statement, he said, quite honestly, that he said he wasn't expecting the extension at all, but he got it, and now he's eager to go out there and prove himself to this team. And it is, I want to preface, what Rashad Bateman is really, because do the Ravens need Rashad Bateman to be an elite receiver? It looks like some people probably expect him to do that, and it looks like Mark Andrews is building him up to produce that, and the Ravens aren't going to, not be happy if he does that. Obviously, they're going to accept that. It only makes this offense even better. But where I'm coming from, and do I expect the Ravens to need Rashad Bateman to be that elite receiver for them? I believe that the Ravens have seen enough from Bateman to trust him as a reliable receiver, but under different expectations. When you think first round receiver, if you're gonna extend him especially, you probably think he's your number one, at least your number two option. But with Rashad Bateman, those expectations have shifted a little bit, in my opinion, because I don't think he'll be a guy where the Ravens throw it to 10 times a game, 12 times a game, he gets 8 to 10 receptions, close to 100 yards. I don't think he's that. I think he's had a big enough sample size. Even through some of the injuries, I think in his play that we've seen enough where I believe he's not that type of receiver for them. And it's not like they really need one with this offense, with how run heavy they're going to be with this offense, bringing in Derrick Henry now, especially to go along with Lamar Jackson and Keaton Mitchell, who they really liked last year. I don't think there's going to be enough of a target share for even Zay Flowers, for even Mark Andrews, well, maybe not Mark Andrews, but maybe even Isaiah Likely, to produce these numbers where you're getting 800, 700 yards. I just don't think this offense is really built for that, to have multiple receivers. Like I talked about the Minnesota Vikings yesterday and how they could have multiple. I don't think this offense is built like that, and it's not a bad thing. That's just what they do. That's just how their offense operates, and based on that, to go along with what we've seen from Rashad Bateman, I don't think it's out of the question to look at Rashad Bateman a little bit differently, to just fit his role rather than fit the expectations that everybody has of him. And also, I think the contract extension does give us some more insight on what the Ravens are thinking of Rashad Bateman, because, like I said, they paid him an extension of 2 years and $12.8 million, that extension. You look around the league in a wide receiver market where some receivers you could say are getting overpaid and are getting a lot more money. No wide receiver one is making or is getting that type of extension that Rashad Bateman got, and that's a fair evaluation of what the Ravens have seen, what they see him as going forward. 2 years, almost some more prove-it years to really buy into what Rashad Bateman could be for them. And I think it just shows how they value him and the level of trust that they have in him, because they've seen enough to want to keep him on the team. I feel like some teams would have seen the injuries and just the lack of production and numbers that they could have moved on from him. But the Ravens definitely value him, maybe not as a wide receiver one anymore, but just to fit his role, get 6 to 5 targets, 7 targets, make 4 catches, and have around 60 to 70 yards per game. Ideally for Rashad Bateman, it's just the role that he would fit with this team in my estimation, just going off of what I've seen from him and from what the Ravens gave him as an extension. Again, it's not a bad thing, and I just don't think the Ravens absolutely need Rashad Bateman to be an elite receiver, because I think Zay Flowers has a little bit more of a higher ceiling. Mark Andrews will be back healthy. He's one of the best tight ends in football. And you're now incorporating Isaiah Likely even more. Different formations, not so much spread out where the wide receivers can really succeed. I anticipated being more of a 12 personnel, getting 2 tight ends out there, and the Ravens making a living off of that. There's only one football out there. There's only one football, and it can't go to everybody. Rashad Bateman is not going to put up these elite numbers, but if he just fits his role with the Ravens, I think both parties will be happy. If the Ravens are successful, they're winning, Rashad Bateman is contributing at least somewhat, and he stays healthy, I think it's a win-win for both parties in my evaluation of that. But Mark Andrews seems to have high hopes for him. It's good to have him, but don't be extremely disappointed if he doesn't live up to some of the numbers. If he's just contributing and the Ravens are good, I think that's all I would need if I was a Ravens fan. But leave your guys' thoughts on how you evaluate Rashad Bateman, and if you think he could be even better than what I'm projecting him to be in 2024 and going forward. But that'll be that segment, and we have one more to talk about on today's show. Looking at the Green Bay Packers, everybody's putting them right away in contention for the NFC, but there's one thing that is lagging a little bit that could be a hurdle in their quest to compete for the NFC conference title. I'll tell you guys what that is and where my doubts lie after the final break of the show. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. We are back here on the show to talk about the last segment on today's episode. The Green Bay Packers, not to rain on their parade, but there is something about this team that just gives me a little bit cause to pause on really putting them up there with the 49ers, with the Eagles, with the Lions. It's that offensive line. It's that offensive line that I think is good. I want to buy into it, but there's definitely some concerns. Not so much with the talent, but more so with the depth that I have to rely upon if some injuries happen, which most likely they will happen in an NFL football season. Once they happen, are they going to just fall apart? Is this offensive line going to look different? Talent-wise, like I mentioned, in combination with this scheme that Matt LaFleur has for the Packers and all their offensive weapons and Jordan Love getting better, Green Bay can certainly compete to win that division especially, and also to compete in the NFC conference. But the offensive line is something that I'm like 60-40 on right now. It is definitely a major concern for me, or at least a slight concern if I just said 60-40. But Pro Football Focus ranked some of the offensive lines in the NFL, and they had Green Bay's as the worst offensive line in the NFC North. They ranked them at 14 in the NFL. The Minnesota Vikings were just ahead of them at 13th. The Chicago Bears offensive line was ranked at 11, and the Detroit Lions offensive line was the first. They ranked them number 1 in the NFL, and it's hard to argue against that, but the Packers were ranked last in that division. And where the doubts stem with this offensive line and what could be a problem as we get later into the year against tougher competition, it gets a little bit tighter, there's a little bit more pressure. Will this offensive line still be whole and healthy heading into some of the more important games? Some of the doubts are Elton Jenkins' health concerns. He's probably their best offensive lineman, but he has been dealing with some injuries last year and going on to years prior to that. Those are the major concerns with him, but other than that, he is the most reliable and most talented offensive lineman that they have, but it's just a case of having him on the field to contribute to the team. And also, they lost a starter in Jon Runyan, another very good, experienced offensive lineman, to solidify this unit, but he signed with the New York Giants this offseason as a free agent, so now you have to replace him and his experience. Then also, you have inconsistent performances from the projected left tackle, Rasheed Walker. I think he did all right, but at some points, you definitely got a little concerned, especially if he is going to start for them, protecting Jordan Love's blind side. I don't think you can put 100% of your confidence in Rasheed Walker. And also on the other side now, the right tackle, Zach Tom, has again shown flashes, has shown a lot of potential, a high ceiling, but again, it comes with learning. There are some hiccups in his game that he does have to iron out, and he is going to be the starter, so whether or not he has developed that much into this next year on that offensive line is going to be something to watch. Then you have center Josh Myers. I think he has just overall not been the most solid center in the NFL, especially when you're comparing him to these other offensive linemen. The center, as the name entails, is at the center of everything. He is usually calling out coverages, changing coverages, calling out alignments on the defensive line, that sort of thing. And also just his pass protection, I think he might be just a little bit too small. I don't want to throw some shade out there to Josh Myers, but it seems like he struggles with bigger defensive linemen in some cases, just getting overpowered. So that's something to watch out there. And also, you got a new offensive guard in there, Sean Ryan, to replace Jon Runyan, getting the likely start this year, which will be his first time start in the NFL. So a new guy coming in to fill the void of a guy that you had so much expectation for, just reliability that Jon Runyan brought. Now you bring in a new guy, and what are the expectations going to be for him? They're going to be high, but at the same point, what can we realistically expect from Sean Ryan to protect Jordan Love and have him not be under duress each and every snap of the ball? And then you have a bigger problem on your hands because you're talking about injuring your starting quarterback. And also after that, just overall the depth with this offensive line is the biggest issue with me. After they lost David Bakhtiari, they did draft Jordan Morgan, but I would have liked to keep both of them on this offensive line just in case one or two offensive linemen get hurt. You don't want to see it, but it's very unlikely that you have the exact same offensive lineman in week 1 that you do in week 18 and have all of them play every game. It usually doesn't happen, and that's why you build your offensive line a lot outside of the starting 5. And I just have questions about who those guys are in case Elton Jenkins gets hurt again potentially. Rasheed Walker at such an important position at left tackle. You drafted Jordan Morgan to play either tackle position, but is he going to be ready in case Rasheed Walker gets hurt? Do you want to have a rookie that hasn't played at all season to just jump in there and protect Jordan Love's blind side? That's just something that they really have to take into consideration before they really just not address the offensive line anymore. Then you look overall, just if they stay healthy, and most of them do play the entire regular season, overall they're still around the middle of the pack. I would probably rank them around the same that Pro Football Focus did rank them, but I would say just the fear of getting injured to one or multiple of these guys could be a plague later on in the year, playing against better teams as well. They have the 4th hardest schedule this year, so they're going to face some great defenses, some tough defensive linemen, some very good edge rushers. And with that, is this offensive line going to hold up? Could you trust them in some of those games, in some of the most important games? You want to say that you can because they were successful, at least most of these guys last year, on how successful overall the Packers were and how efficient their offense was. But again, it only takes one or a couple injuries to just really crumble all of that and have Jordan Love running for his life back there, making ill-advised throws, making wrong reads. Not what you want to see, especially with Jordan Love being in this group of wanting to get paid. If you contribute a lot of money to Jordan Love and invest a lot of money in him, the last thing any Packers fan and any Packers organizational member, Brian Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, the last thing they want to see is Jordan Love get hurt, especially if they give him a bag this offseason and then he gets hurt. Depending on the significance of it, it could be a complete disaster, a nightmare if they don't shore up this offensive line. You have options out there. Connor Williams remains probably the best offensive lineman out there. He has been dealing with a very severe knee injury, but his agent, his team have said that he is ready, is going to be ready for training camp, and whoever does sign him, he'll be ready to participate. So if the Packers can add him or maybe somebody up to his level, I don't have the other free agent offensive lineman on hand, but if they could add him alongside Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Rasheed Walker, and Zach Tom, and maybe not start Sean Ryan right away in his first start in the as he started in the NFL, it could shore up this offensive line some more. Connor Williams is still at a good age. I think he's only 27 or 28, so he can contribute right away. He played a massive part in the Dolphins offensive line last year, even though he got hurt. I think adding someone like him could be great for this team for depth purposes and also just talent-wise as well, with how much he could improve them just overall. You're not just getting a piece to be safe if somebody gets hurt. He's going to improve this offensive line as well. Again, it won't be because of the play of this line, really just the depth and me worrying that one of them getting hurt could look very bad for this offense, because there is a lot of expectations on the Packers. Everybody expects them to be exciting again, build on last year. Heading into the second year, it's a lot harder to do that, and now teams will be ready for it. The last thing you need is your quarterback not being comfortable at all and just not really being helpless, just being helpless back there behind an offensive line that can't really do too much compared to last year. But that's how I'm feeling, a little bit nervous about it, and it would be a shame if they couldn't compete to the level that they can, because everybody is dealing with the repercussions of having an injured offensive lineman. I hate it. I hate when it happens to my favorite team in the Steelers, but it is a risk that they're running if they don't add some more depth to that position. But that will do it for this episode. That'll do it for this segment, obviously, as well. I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media: Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok. If you want to see more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, to check out different forms of content around the NFL on this show, and with me as well. As a last reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more discussions and conversations around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you for joining me on today's episode, and hopefully you guys have an awesome 4th of July and enjoy the rest of your night as well.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to